Okay, so it's time for a recap, and I'm doing this as a speed painting, speed drawing kind of thing, um, just because there's a lot of stuff here over the last couple days. Initially, I will, well, as you can see here, I'm actually working in toonz raster mode with the arc tool, which is quite useful. Um, I had really been moving forward with this scene using toonz vector layers, and what I was finding was that um, I think toonz vector layers are useful for two things. One would be if we weren't doing an anime, if we were doing something more like a Cartoon Network type of show, or your typical like Family Guy or Matt Groening type of content, then I think using vector-based objects would be probably a good way to go, especially because they're so crisp and you can vary the width of the line after the fact and this sort of thing. Sort of basically create assets. So I think for puppet-based animation, it would be more broadly applicable. What I was finding with this anime is that the first of all, the vector tools were definitely problematic from the standpoint of pressure sensitivity. I mean, it's a kind of a bit of a joke. Actually, that's true with toonz raster levels as well. And that's why I'm actually doing the outlines here at a fixed width. I think I have pressure enabled, but basically I'm not using it. The range of pressure is pretty low. It's like maybe, I can't see here on the screen, but I don't know if it's 1 to 3 or whatever, but ultimately I think I wound up switching it to like 2 and just leaving it at a fixed width. So what I'm doing right there is, I believe what I did was I turned off use X sheet as, what is it? X sheet as animation sheet, something like that. That preference setting makes it so that, because we have a camera move in this scene, I can't really see the characters where they're going to be and edit the okay, and there we've got an undo bug that I encountered, but anyway, the idea is that I have to go downstream in the X sheet after the camera move has taken place and edit the image, but once I start drawing, I don't want it to create a new drawing in the strip. I want to edit the existing drawing, so for that reason I have to turn off the option I usually have on, which is use X sheet as, I think it's X sheet as animation sheet. I'm actually going to pull this up to make sure I have the wording correct, but it's in the preferences under drawing. So anyway, what happened was, as I got in the groove, and you notice there, I got to turn this. Hang on half a second while I pull up OpenToonz and check this. I'm looking at my preferences, and the exact setting is under drawing, and under auto creation, use X sheet as animation sheet. That's normally what I do. So I've been setting the auto creation to disabled so that I can go ahead and edit the drawings at times after the fact. Farther down on the X sheet than the point where the drawing was created. So this is another thing I actually found super helpful, was the fill check, which is under the view menu. That was actually super useful, because as I'm drawing along, as soon as a shape is judged by OpenToonz to be closed, boom, it turns gray. That's super, super, super useful. And of course, the toonz raster levels are much more reliable when it comes to filling. So getting back to what I was saying earlier, the problem with vectors is even if they're kind of sort of satisfactory from an inking standpoint, it all falls apart at the paint stage. What happens is toonz will forget that you've filled a shape. If you make even slight modifications to the curves, sometimes fills that are in completely different places will just disappear. I mean, it's really, really buggy. So for that reason, I'm like, okay, forget it. If if the pencil test is correct, then that sort of suggests that we're just going to ink over the pencils, so scalability of our characters really isn't an issue. So you're not gaining anything from vectors from the standpoint of being able to like scale things. Not too much. Now there is a camera move, but it's always going from bigger to smaller. You know, it's being inked at the larger size. So for that reason, if it gets a little smaller, if the ink lines, you know, shrink a bit, that's really no big deal. And so now here I'm just editing Ninja number 2 because he's actually pushing himself up off the floor, so that's what that's all about. So anyway, the process of inking this way has actually been pretty pleasurable, which I'm kind of surprised to find myself saying, because so much of it has been sort of buggy and hit and miss. But so let's see, what am I doing here? It looks like I wasn't quite satisfied with well, first of all, it's not a sword that was stuck in the guy's back. It's a knife. And it's not only a knife, but it's a small knife. I wish I could see this better. Should probably put the video preview on another screen. Let me do that. So it's bigger. Yeah, and this was another thing I discovered, actually, was the history window. I thought, well, that's definitely kind of interesting. I'm going to play with that a little later. So you can't see this, but I'm fiddling around with the Vegas display window settings so that I can see better what's on the screen. Okay, so yeah, I just played around with a couple different ways of drawing this, but now you can see I'm drawing Akari into the shot, and you can get a better idea of, you know, she's really holding her hand out there with a fairly short knife stuck into his back. Once I got the timing on these shots correct, it actually is, I found it was kind of funny, you know, to watch, which is what we were after, because and I think at the end of this video you'll see that, but basically when at the end the first ninja's eyes sort of pop open, and you know, when he realizes something is wrong, you know, and that's what he feels, the knife poked into his back. So anyway, just getting Akari blocked in, and I like the camera motion. I'm really happy with that. So yeah, what you want to realize is that this shot is really sudden after the guy's eyes pop open from the completely opposite point of view, you know, looking at the ninjas from their front. His eyes pop open, and then it instantly cuts to this shot where the two of them turn around and, you know, see what's up. So it's pretty funny. At least to me it's funny. So I did a fair amount of work with the schematic in this sequence of shots, in the sense of using the animate tool to do some translating and stuff on the on one column or level, and then basically just using the schematic to connect other levels to that level so they sort of inherit the motion. Now I do want to give a shout out right now to Darren T, D-A-R-R-E-N T, who's another YouTuber, and over the last few days Darren has been extremely helpful with some of the more obscure and arguably buggy aspects of Open Toonz that have been frustrating me, and people have seen that in some of my earlier videos over the last couple of weeks. And Darren weighed in with a bunch of suggestions that were all very helpful about kind of somewhat obscure ways that Open Toonz operates that I needed to understand better in order to use the tools more effectively. The big one was that if you have a column, like if you have a level that has, say, 3 or 4 different pictures in it, and then I was getting frustrated by the fact that I figured if I just double click on a cell and type in a number that corresponds to an image in the strip, that image would show up at that place in the X sheet. And I found that, okay, intuitively that's what I thought should happen, but it doesn't quite work that way. Well, is there a way to kind of get that same effect so that you don't have to either redrag and drop the images into the level, or like if you want to extend and retime it, if you drag out one image so that it lasts a longer number of frames, I didn't necessarily always want to have a ripple edit effect where all the cells that are downstream get moved down as well. So here you can see I'm probably messing around here with mapping the columns to each other. I think that's what was going on there. I'm not really sure, actually. Now, I think at this point, gotta remember what was going on here. This was getting a little difficult from a color standpoint. Now this, and also from a motion standpoint, because again, once a column inherits another column's animation, then of course you've got to go to the first frame of the inheriting column and give it an offset. You know, basically line it up with the column that it's supposed to be moving with. So anyway, that's how I'm doing the shadows. So that was just a line to test to see if the pen was working properly. And then one thing I'm definitely finding is that the traditional anime method of using like red and blue lines to indicate where shadows go and stuff, I'm thinking that's not really the way I want to work, because normally it's a way more consistent and quicker result to just paint black on another level over top of your character and then set that black to semi-transparent in the schematic view. Just render it in multiply mode, which is the in the effects, it's in the layer blending multiply INO. Allows you to yeah, see, this is where I said, okay, enough with the vectors. I've tried, I've given it a fair shake, and enough's enough. And I believe I started completely repainting it in the toonz raster. Yeah, I don't even know what my note was there. Hopefully you guys could read it. One of the ironies of this video I'm doing here is that on YouTube, ultimately, you'll be able to see this better than I can, because my view window isn't full HD. I wonder if I can. Yeah, it's not letting me do it. So anyway, so yeah, you can see here that things are definitely a little more under control, though. And again, I can't really say enough good at this point about the fill check tool. So yeah, here what I realized, I tell you what happened was, I realized we definitely needed another keyframe. I didn't think the motion was smooth enough on his eyes, so I wanted to add another keyframe in between. So this is kind of useful. The way the eraser lets you erase just lines or areas as opposed to both all the time was super useful. And by the way, that's going to come in handy in a lot of places where I think what we're going to want to do is, if we're going to use outlines that are of a uniform width most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, then it's kind of cool to be able to go in and paint over just the lines, and for some parts of the character change the lines to a different color. You know, maybe to make it a color that is just a darker version of the fill color. Now later in this video you'll see that, because you see the white highlights on this character's clothing. Those are going to wind up going the way of the buffalo. We're going to get rid of that, and I decided to change it so that instead we just change the tone of some of the outlines. And I still may use the rim lighting effect in the schematic to you know, to give it an even stronger rimlet effect, because you can see from his face that obviously the light is coming from the door or the window is just to this guy's left. I'm drinking my tasty beverage, by the way, my tasty afternoon beverage. Okay, so then what? Okay, so then I went to the next shot in the sequence. They're actually overlapped, obviously, but they're separate sub-X sheets. And this is just dinking around with the timing, trying to get the timing correct. So yeah, so you can see I kind of changed. I added the wide eyes at the end of the shot, and then also that sort of anime kind of effect where, you know, the lines, you can see those lines that show that he's realizing something's going crazy here. So yeah, I'm kind of bouncing back and forth quite a bit. Man, I should have some music playing in the background, shouldn't I? So yeah, I think I was just kind of testing the timing here. And okay, so what did I do? I actually copied over some of the frames so that I could pull the project up in Vegas and see how the whole scene was shaping up. Okay, so yeah, this is where this is where I'm like, okay, this highlight thing isn't really exactly happening, but it was definitely a little bit niggly trying to get the exact timing on those keyframes of his eyes. You can see there's two columns that are side by side. The reason for that is that I duplicated the drawing and then extended it down, because when the camera pulls out and obviously he's smaller on the screen, all of a sudden his lower abdomen shows up, and well, it wasn't there in the original drawing, and it turned out to be easier to just extend it on another level as opposed to modifying the original drawing. It's one of those things you sort of do and then later you can't remember exactly why you did it, because it does seem like just expanding the size of the canvas and making the drawing bigger would have been fine. Yeah, okay, I think what's going on here is, yeah, I'm looking at the size of his eyes between the two shots and sort of calculating what the midpoint would be between those two, so we can add that extra keyframe in there. And then just a little bit of paint work to just sort of tighten it up. Yeah, it's kind of funny because I know this probably sounds amazing, but I was kind of unaware of what the tool I'm using right now is, the paintbrush. Okay, as opposed to the brush, it's the paint roller or something. I mean, up until actually just a few days ago, I was either brushing to draw lines, or I was using the fill tool, and somehow I sort of missed the paintbrush tool, which is actually super useful, because in earlier work I had done sort of patching and touch up with the brush tool, but of course to open toonz, when you do that, you're creating lines, not fill areas. I don't like all the grids on the screen just like reappeared. I mean, I had never turned them on, so I don't know why those all of a sudden popped up there. So yeah, now I think I had to create an offset for that second drawing to get a line. I don't know what went wrong here. Oh, I see what it is. The level is now referring to the wrong image. So that's just one of those things about OpenToonz that's kind of non-intuitive. By inserting some drawings in the strip, it threw the whole sequence off. Okay, so now I've got to go in and tell OpenToonz that the drawing of his lower abdomen is like a different drawing than it was. So I was saying earlier, one of the things I've learned is when you have a situation like that where you've got multiple drawings in a strip, you can, if you simply add the hook tool, or not, I'm sorry, not the hook tool, the skeleton tool. If you simply invoke the skeleton tool and then immediately put it into animate mode, so don't bother building a skeleton, then in the workspace you can mouse over the skeleton icon, if you will, and then when you mouse over it, a little box appears beside it, and you can change what image the current frame is referring to, and effectively you can use that for like lip sync and stuff like that. Now this was actually kind of tricky, and it looks like a kludgy way to do it, but what I wanted to do is actually take the plastic tool and just add an extra keyframe of motion within one of the drawings. So I think what I did next here was I went to the next drawing and regenerated the skeleton, and that's one good thing about the skeleton tool, or the plastic tool, is it does let you regenerate the skeleton, in the X sheet at different frames. So that motion looks pretty good. I think we're on track here. Honestly, I'm kind of excited today because even though it's been an arduous process, it's been really difficult in many ways, I do feel like we're kind of reaching the point where we know how we're going to do this. We know what to do to get the result, of different kind of problems that you're going to solve. Now here, what we're actually doing is preparing to insert the CGI vase into the shot. Now, to be perfectly truthful, I didn't really use the CGI vase. What I actually used was just a still shot of the rendering of one of the frames of the CGI vase. So I really did it as a 2D shot, but you'll see that here shortly. Okay, so what I did was I took this still. This is just a frame grab from an earlier scene, right? Or an earlier version. Well, okay, this is the previous shot. So this is like the last frame of the previous shot before this entire sequence that we're looking at today. Okay, so the guy rushes over, and I had to browse to find the image I was looking for, so sorry about that. But yeah, so I found that image. I just made 2 copies of it because I wanted the original. I wanted to keep the original, but then I also wanted to isolate the vase by painting out the character, and then I also wanted to isolate the background so I could put it behind the character. And there's still some work that has to be done with that on the scene, because when the camera does the zoom, the background doesn't move at this point. So I can fix that by just scaling the background a little bit, and then it'll look right when the camera zooms in. But yeah, so I just took this still image and I'm like breaking it into pieces is all I'm doing, so that I can use each component to get the vase into the shot and get the background behind the character. Hope that all made sense. Just so you know, we're actually coming up on the end of this video. I'm not really sure. I think I got as far as getting the vase in there. And what you're seeing probably, yeah, see here I'm just painting. I'm just using my paint brushes to go ahead and, it's like an oil paintbrush or something. And I'm just kind of painting in so that I know that it's going to definitely fill in the space behind the character, so like the edges don't show through or something. The edges from where the character was in the original shot. So, yeah, that kind of works, right? Okay, so there's guy number 2, and you'll see what I'm talking about as far as the scaling here in a second. It's like the shot looks cool, but it really doesn't look quite right because the background doesn't move. Excuse me. So, yeah. Camera pans over, but yet nothing happens with the background. So, did I actually paint this guy? It looks like I did. Okay. So I'm like, all right, let's paint this guy. Let's get her done. And I think I already had it. Yeah, I've got a shadow layer there in the column to the right, the level to the right. So then I just need to fix the offset of it and have it inherit the motion of our character, so that when we turn on the rendering, it will in fact look like a shadow. So there it is. There's multiply INO. And that's it for today. Sorry it stopped so suddenly, but believe me, there's going to be more.